Hi there, I'm Jennifer Tryon. Well, if you're like me, maybe you're ready to take your quilting beyond just straight sewing squares and strips. How about the apple core shape? It's much easier when you don't have to cut it freehand. Check out the apple core dies. They're part of the Patchwork system, and you can see they come nested just like this. Anybody who's used the Build-A-Block system or who has used dies in scrapbooking or card making will be familiar with these. It's a thin metal die that's thicker and deeper, so it can take multiple layers of fabric. And what's great about using dies, especially for more intricate shapes like the apple core, is that it's the same shape every single time. So I'm going to start with my clear plate, and because I want to do multiple layers, I'm going to lay down my metal shim. Then I'm going to take my fat quarter, I'm going to fold it once, then I'm going to fold it in half again, and then fold that down lengthwise. And I'm going to place that on my metal shim. So each time I cut it, it's going to be 8 layers. I'm folding it this way so I can get as many apple cores out of one fat quarter as I possibly can. So I've got my plastic plate, my metal shim, my fabric and my die, now my plastic shim, and my top plate. And I'm just gonna run it through the Gemini. No cranking, it does all the heavy lifting. And voila, 8 apple cores, perfectly cut. Imagine trying to cut that freehand. It'd be so difficult. Even the most advanced quilter would struggle to get this shape. I'm gonna run it through one more time, use up the bottom part of this fabric, and get 8 more. So I'd suggest choosing a bunch of different coordinating patterns, cutting them all up, and then we'll be ready to sew them together. So now that you've got your apple core pieces cut out, I want to show you how to assemble them into a 4-patch block. Because we're not dealing with straight lines here, it's a little bit different than what you might be used to. Nothing to be afraid of, but I want to warn you, this is not your typical seam, so take it slow. Okay, here's how we start. One piece goes horizontally and one piece goes vertically, but we're going to sew them right sides together. Now look, that doesn't exactly look like the seam that we're used to, but don't worry, it's gonna come together. What I want you to do is fold both pieces so you know where the center line is, and that's where I want you to pin, edge to edge. Not down here, but up here. And now we're used to going, not this time. All right, let's take it to the machine. I'm gonna show you what I want you to do. If it helps you, use a little scrap of fabric as a leader. That just means the machine gets working before it gets to the good piece of fabric, and that way the needle and the thread are already engaged, so you're less likely to have problems with the fabric or the thread getting stuck down in the throat plate. I'm just going to start with the needle down, make sure I'm over 1/4 inch, and I'm going to make sure that these fabrics are flush together. This may take some manipulating, that's okay. So I'm just going a few stitches, maybe 3, 4, 5 stitches, and then I'm stopping and making sure with my fingers that the fabric is still flush, that the edges are still lined up together. This is not one you're going to want to zoom through, at least not right away. And see that curve? This is where you're in charge of making sure it all comes together. See how I'm placing those edges together? And now when it comes off, you'll have a curved edge. Let's do another one. And you'll just keep repeating 2 by 2 until you have a series of 2. And then you're going to sew those 2 together with another 2. There's a trick to bringing these seams together. You're going to sew what's actually called a split seam, which means I'm going to sew from here to here and then from here to here, and meeting them in the middle. If I tried to sew this S shape, the seam wouldn't be nearly as neat. So let's try it. Right sides together, and now you can see there's nowhere close to a straight line here, but you're gonna employ the exact same technique that we just used. I'm going to fold the one side in half, and you're gonna sew these together as if you're just sewing your 2s. If you only think about this like you're sewing 2 together, it won't be nearly as intimidating. See how I'm stopping and starting and shifting my fabric? That's what you want to do. Remember, there's no need for speed here. We're shuffling our fabric over to make sure that the edges are lined up. And that means you can only go a few stitches at a time. But trust me, the end result is worth it. Now I'm gonna stop when I get to the middle seam. And then I'm gonna sew again from the opposite direction. See how I've got a split seam here? So now I'm gonna sew from this edge to this edge, meeting in the middle, and that's what's gonna give me that perfect point. Again, folding in the center, just a finger press. You don't need to actually use the iron. Your finger's good enough. So even if it looks bubbly and like it might not meet, because we've used the die to cut this out, we know all of these shapes are the same size. Again, I'm putting my leader fabric down first so that the needle and the thread are already engaged. And now I'm gonna meet up with my other seam. There, a perfect apple core 4-patch. And so long as you know how to sew 2 apple cores together, you'll be able to sew 200 apple cores together. And that's the idea. You just keep building, first 2 by 2, then 4 by 4, and then keep your 4s going. Continue sewing 2 together, and it'll just grow exponentially. Because so long as you can sew 2, you can sew 200. And because you're guaranteed that all of your apple cores are the same shape, you're gonna have much greater success when you're sewing these together. And you're gonna take your quilting to the next level.